مناورات النجم الساطع، الناس اللي هم مش شباب قوي اكيد متذكرين اسم النجم الساطع لما كانت بتتعمل في مصر من فتره طويله جدا، تدريبات مشتركه بين القوات المسلحه المصريه والقوات المسلحه الامريكيه. من حوالي 8 سنين توقفت تماما هذه المناورات وهذه التدريبات، ثم عادت هذا العام مرة أخرى. لماذا توقفت ولماذا تعود هذه المناورات في ظل ما يحدث في منطقة الشرق الأوسط على وجه الخصوص، وخصوصا أننا بنتكلم على 8 سنين التوقف فيها كانت 8 سنين حرجة بالنسبة للمنطقة، انتشار الإرهاب، ثورات الربيع العربي وغيره. بيسعدني النهارده ان انا التقي بشخصيه تعتبر من اهم الشخصيات في القوات المسلحه الامريكيه عشان يدور حوار بيننا ليس فقط عن النجم الساطع، ولكن يدور الحوار ايضا حول ما يحدث في المنطقه والرؤيه العسكريه الامريكيه لما يحدث. برحب بالفريق اول جوزيف فوتيل مدير القياده الامريكيه المشتركه. It's a pleasure to have you with us, sir.
Thank you. It's good to be with you.
So let me start by asking you, the Bright Star have been suspended for 8 years or so, and now they're back. Why were they suspended? Why are they back?
Well, I think there's probably a variety of reasons why we suspended Bright Star in the past. Could have been due to some of our operational tempo, and could have been due to some differences. I think the key point is that we are back to this exercise now. So as I came into this position, having been participated in Bright Star exercises in the past, we recognize the importance of this for not only our bilateral relationship, but for others in the region to participate in. So we're very keen to get this exercise started and get it focused on contemporary challenges that both of our countries face, particularly in the area of unconventional warfare and counterterrorism.
Yeah, that's precisely what I was going to ask. You said the contemporary challenges. So basically things have changed in terms of if we look at them today compared to 8 years ago. Terrorism was there 8 years ago, but not as widespread as it is right now. So I don't want to get into military secrets, but could you let our viewers know what do we do when we do the exercises to counter terrorism?
Sure, and let me start my answer by expressing my condolences on the losses that the Egyptian security forces sustained yesterday in the Sinai. I think this is a good reminder for those that don't live in Egypt or in the region, just of the important role that Egypt is playing and the fight that they have ongoing with these violent extremist organizations. So what we're doing in this particular exercise is there are several different segments to it. One of them involves what we call as a command post exercise, and in this case we bring our staffs and our leaders together, and over a scenario we conduct planning, we conduct discussions, and then we use the simulation capabilities, in this case the simulation capabilities that the Egyptian armed forces have, to actually run a simulation of an exercise. And so it's a way to train leaders and to train staffs on how to deal with this. And then we also have some more practical work where we have some of our units that will actually conduct some training, those live fire exercises, and they'll be set up around typical scenarios that conventional forces may encounter when they're fighting terrorists or countering some type of insurgency type of activity. So it's really a combination of training leaders and staffs and doing practical exercises with our troops on the ground.
With what we've seen from terrorist acts in the past years, we see it's more like a guerrilla war rather than a conventional war. But we could see here the use of warships and the use of the Air Force. How is this? Looks to me, and I'm very little experienced, looks to me like an all-out warfare exercise rather than countering some guerrillas.
Well, I think we're building on the scenarios that we see out there. One of the things that I would just remind our viewers of is, as the United States and the coalition that is fighting the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria, this is a terrorist organization that actually has for several years now operated like an army, and so we've had to approach them in that way. So the operations that we just completed in Mosul, these were large-scale operations that involved all kinds of things, and in some cases it looked like conventional operations as opposed to the more discrete counterterrorism operations. So I think it's important to understand that these violent extremist organizations take on different forms. Certainly what we may see in the Sinai or in Afghanistan is different, and so we have to adapt to it. So I think this is the value of these exercises, is being able to look at different situations and how we adapt our forces to fight in these particular situations. So as we move forward in this exercise, and we've already started talking about our next version of this exercise, we'll adapt this, and we'll try to make it, we'll try to keep it as relevant as we can to the situations that we're dealing with. We simply don't have enough special operations forces to do everything, so we do have to rely on our conventional force capability.
And I don't want to drag you into politics, I know I shouldn't, but are you suspecting, or looking at from a military perspective, are you suspecting things to be worsening, for example, in Libya and the transfer of the ISIS troops or guerrillas into Libya, and that could be a source of fear not only for countries like Egypt but also for Southern Europe?
Well, I think that is a concern. What I would share with you is that it's our strategy, the coalition strategy, whether it's in Iraq or Syria or in Yemen or in Afghanistan. It is to annihilate this enemy at that location and not allow them to go other places. So we don't want to. Even
though what we hear is that many of them are leaking into Libya.
Yeah, I'm sure there may be some of that, but frankly, it's not as wide scale as it might be reporting. I think what you may be seeing is that fighters who perhaps had intended to go to Iraq or Syria now find it very difficult to get there because of the situation. So they're going to other places in this case. And so I think this highlights how important it is that the exercise like we're doing in Bright Star, and how we have to develop relationships between all of our partners out here to do this. The United States is, as powerful as we like to believe we are, can't do this ourselves. We depend on regional partners and others out here to help us do this, and I think it's vice versa. We really have to work together against this threat, and that's really what we're trying to do, is build a very strong network of willing and capable partners out there who can share information, who can conduct operations, and who can really keep the pressure on these extremist networks.
From an expert point of view, Egypt has an issue of having more than 1,000 kilometers of borders to the west, more than 1,000 to the south, in addition to the ones we're having with the Palestinians, with Gaza. What is the best way, and the United States has, of course, the experience of long borders as well. What is the way in order to do it, in order to safeguard those borders?
Yeah, I think the best way to do this is to ensure that we have some plans, we have facilities, we have mechanisms that allow us to share information and understand what's happening in all areas. So, as you know, there's coalitions working to the east and to the west, and so it's very, very important, I think, that we have a mechanism where we can share information to ensure that the Egyptian authorities and others who are involved in this have the best situational understanding of what is happening, so that when we do apply our very finite military capabilities, that we can be as precise and accurate as we can. So I think this is the key aspect of it. I would also comment that your lead in there, I think, highlights the importance of Egypt in this. Egypt sits at a critical location here, with challenges on both their east and west flank, and so they really are really very, very key to this fight. And so this partnership that we've had for so many years, and the things that we're doing now, in my mind, are just even magnified, and it's more important now than at any time in the past, I believe.
And from a political perspective, that's from a civilian point of view, that Egyptians have lost faith in many of the institutions in the United States except the military. We've always seen the military. I'm not talking about the political leadership. I'm talking just about people like me. They looked at the U.S. Army, the Pentagon, as a prime supporter of the Egyptian army and of Egypt at large. Do you see that this is continuing, or do we look at what is happening in terms of what's happening in the Senate and so on as this support is drawing back?
I think the message that I would want to send to the Egyptian people is that our military to military relationships are going to remain very strong. They have for a long period of time, and certainly I am very committed to that. In my meetings with the leadership yesterday, both your political and your military leadership, we certainly emphasize that. But I think it's important to understand that the relationship between our two countries is very deep. It is very robust. There are lots of different areas and planes on which we are collaborating, and there are certainly going to be disagreements along the way. But the important part is that we can work through these disagreements. So Bright Star is a good example. We stopped doing that exercise 8 years ago. We've now restarted it because we recognize it's in both of our interests. We are collaborating right now in counterterrorism in ways that we have not in the past. And this is a very, very positive sign. We are moving forward on technical interoperability agreements like we have not in the past. These are all things that were in the past had been points that we had some friction on, and now we're moving forward with this. So, you know, with this current challenge on the assistance and stuff like that.
Aren't you concerned a bit? I mean, Egypt was totally relying on U.S. armaments till recently. This new diversification of weaponry, is it worrying, or is it a subject of concern?
I think it should be worrying to Egypt. It's worrying to us. I mean, I think when you procure equipment from a variety of different resources, you make it very difficult to sustain it and train on it and manage it over time. So we certainly think there's a benefit to being interoperable and sharing similar equipment here as we move forward. So from a military standpoint, yes, I take your point very seriously, and we would certainly prefer that our very best partners in the region, we have good interoperability with them. So
but we know that politics has interfered in this issue and has made it a bit difficult for Egypt to rely totally on U.S. armaments.
There are, yes, and that may be the case, but we also have some mechanisms here. There are some upcoming meetings in Washington where we'll be talking about our long-term relationship and the security assistance aspect of that, and how we continue to lay out a roadmap for moving forward. I think it's very important that we continue to have very frank and candid discussions about the capabilities that Egypt needs, and how we get to how we try to provide those for you through these programs. There certainly are areas that we have some disagreements on, and I think those have been articulated. I believe we're working through those. I certainly had an opportunity to talk about that yesterday with your leadership. And we'll continue to do our best to work through these things.
That's exactly my point here. I mean, you've met with President Sisi yesterday, and you've had a discussion, and I guess this is not the first time that you've met. This
is our third meeting.
Your third meeting, and this time it's taking place while the exercises are happening, and they're coming back. So what's the difference in that third meeting, and how do you see the exchange that's going to be happening in the near future?
Well, I think what we've tried to do just in the time that I've been in this position, and again, I'm building upon the great work that was done by my predecessors, but what we've tried to do is working with General Higazi and the armed forces, and certainly with the support of the president, we tried to identify some very specific things that we want to move forward on. So Bright Star was an example of this. We've all agreed that we wanted to get this exercise back on track, and so we have. And I do recognize it's a little bit much smaller than it has been in the past, but it's much more focused on the relevant threats, and we'll continue to grow that and expand it. But we'll want to keep it focused on the relevant challenges. We've moved forward in counterterrorism. This is another area. The technical agreements that we've talked about. These are all areas that we have identified together, collaboratively, that we want to move forward on, and we have. And so I think the key is to make sure that we have frank and candid discussions. We identify where friction points are in our very deep relationship, and we concentrate on working through those. This isn't a relationship that has just lasted a year. This has lasted decades, and it will last decades into the future. And we're gonna continue to do our best to work through all these.
Let me also tell you some of the concerns that we civilians have from a distance when we see them. Now that you've said it's a smaller scale presence of the U.S. Army in the exercise, and we look at the rumors that have been said that the United States wants to change the ideology of the Egyptian army from being a regular army that fights wars into just forces that counter terrorism. How true is this?
I don't think that's true at all. It's not our. We're not trying to tell you what to do. We're trying to share the benefit of our experience here in some of these things. As this exercise is, we've designed this exercise this first time around. Again, we're trying to focus on the challenges that we both have. There was a time I can remember in my experience of participating in Bright Stars where we had it was large, tens and tens of thousands of troops on the ground. Frankly, that's not the way that the United States does exercises anymore. We are much more focused in this, and we are much more trying to address the specific challenges that we're dealing with out here in terms of this. So I think it's important to focus on the substance of what we're training on together and what we're working on, what we're trying to address, as opposed to just the size of it. We recognize the importance of making sure we contribute to these exercises, and we'll continue to do that. I feel very confident in our ability to make sure we bring the right forces. But I think the important point is what are the things that we are working on together in this.
I'll break the line of thought and talk about you personally, Commander Votel. You've served in many countries. You've been in Europe, you've been in Sarajevo, you've been in Naples, you've been in many places, and that has probably, of course, added to your experience and your vision of seeing what the world looks like in terms of the way you served with I-4, I guess, and many of these peacekeeping troops. So how do you see, from a peacekeeper's point of view, rather than a military warfare man, how do you see the area right now?
Well, I think the region here, there certainly are a number of security challenges that we're dealing with. We've talked about violent extremism. We see it in Iraq and Syria, and we see it in Afghanistan, we see it in Yemen, and we see it in a number of other countries in the region. So this colors the environment right here. In the region, we also have state actors that are playing a not helpful role. Iran, for example, while it has a deep historical, cultural role to play in the region, right now is playing one that foments instability as opposed to stability in the region, with their support to proxy organizations, their very virulent ideology that they revolutionary ideology that they profess, their proliferation of technology, the threats that they are posing in critical waterways right here. This is another key aspect of the region. And there are disagreements between some of the countries in the region. I mean, we are paying attention to the disagreement between some of the Gulf states and in Egypt with Qatar over some things there. So the way that I look at the region is that there is a lot going on out here, and there is a lot of conflict taking place. But in that conflict, there are also opportunities. And so the way that we have to look at this is we can't just focus on the problems. We have to look at where the opportunities are. And opportunity is right here with with Egypt, and as an example, reinitiation of our Bright Star exercise. Here's an opportunity where two nations share a common view to fight violent extremism, and we're working together on that. So we have to multiply that across the region. So in my view, we try to understand the region, and then we try to look for opportunities where we can move forward.
Now that you yourself have raised it, we're talking about this conflict that's happening between the three Gulf states plus Egypt versus Qatar in terms of helping, aiding terrorism, and this may cause a bit of a problem for the United States because all 5 states are allies of the United States. You have your own military base in Qatar, you have military base in Bahrain, and you have presence in Saudi, you have good relations with Egypt, there's also good relations with the UAE. So how do you see this being resolved, especially with all these military presence points that you have in the region?
Yeah, I think the only way this can be resolved is diplomatically. So there needs to be an effort to resolve this diplomatically. I know my country is very engaged in this. Our leadership is very engaged in trying to bring the parties together to address these differences, and I think that's important. I think from my perspective is what does concern me is that while we work through this diplomatically, it's my desire, it's my goal to minimize the impact to our military cooperation. We've spent years and decades bringing people together and making sure that we were collaborative and we were very cooperative among ourselves, particularly in the Gulf cooperation states. And so it's concerning to me that when we have these kind of political differences here, that this begins to unravel our cooperation, and it creates space for others, like Iran, to fill in here. So I'm very concerned about that. And from the United States standpoint, I think the President has made it very clear that we expect all countries to stop financing, stop support to violent extremism, and so I think.
Again, I don't want to drag you into the politics and the statements made by the politicians in terms of how come we're speaking about Iran as a rogue nation while Qatar has become a rogue nation itself in aiding and financing terrorism, because this is very political. But there's been talk that the United States is considering that maybe they would have at a certain point to abandon the ID'd base in Qatar.
There's no planning or discussion about that right now. I just visited some of our units down there just really before coming to Egypt here. So that's a key location to us, as is our maritime facility in Bahrain and the bases that we use down in the Emirates and other facilities we have throughout the region. So we're not considering that, and to me that would be. That would be
But
extreme.
aren't you concerned to have a base in a country, and that country is subsidizing those that the United States is fighting, or this is not proven yet?
Again, I think we call on all countries to stop financing, to fight the ideology and address this. And so, I think these things have to be talked about. They have to be worked out in diplomatic channels. We're not looking to move anything at this particular point.
Okay. Let me take you away from the Middle East, because the Middle East is really a very sad story. I'll take you to an even sadder story. I'll take you to North Korea and what's happening, because nobody understands what is it. Is it a military confrontation? Is it World War III? Is it the book on the beach, or what is it? How do you see this? Is it only an issue of rhetoric, or is it more serious than that?
Well, let me just start by highlighting to you that North Korea is not in my area responsibility as for my particular command here. But to your question, let me just offer this: is that I think what we are concerned about is the provocative actions that North Korea is taking with its increased missile capability, and now with its proclaimed nuclear capability here that threatens not only our country, but threatens a variety of others in the region. And I think this is very unhelpful, and I think it has to be taken seriously. I don't think we as military professionals have the luxury of not taking these kinds of threats seriously. And so I think what you see from the United States and many of the other allies out there is a very serious look at this. Certainly the United Nations is taking this seriously, as they have passed additional sanctions just in the last 24 hours here. So I think we have to take, I think this is real, and I think it's very, very serious.
Back to the region. We had a break, so back to the region. Are you concerned with the Turkish presence in Qatar at this stage?
Well, I think Turkey and Qatar have had a relationship for a number of years. It's certainly within their rights to have bilateral relationships between countries. I don't have any particular concern about that. But again, I do think that we just have to. We have to work our way through this right here.
It's acceptable for the U.S. that Turkey plays the role of a policeman in the region. You don't mind that?
Well, I think Turkey has interests in the region, and they are pursuing their interests just like we are pursuing our interests right here. I wouldn't describe Turkey as a policeman in the region. I don't know that that's necessarily how I would characterize what they're doing.
How would you characterize it?
Well, I think they have a relationship with Qatar, and they are exercising their relationship with them.
And Qatar has good relations also with Iran, so you wouldn't mind if there are Iranian forces in Qatar?
Well, as we've talked about, Iran has played a destabilizing role in the region. Turkey is a NATO ally to the United States, and so that means something. That's important to us, and so we have a well-established, long relationship with Turkey, and so I distinguish very clearly between Turkey and Iran, just in terms of our relationship.
I mean, okay, let me reverse that. You wouldn't mind seeing Egyptian forces, for example, present in one of the Gulf states? We are your allies.
I don't necessarily think that's something for me to decide. This is for Egypt and the Gulf countries to decide if they want to do exercises together, if they want to do some of these things together to increase their...
Yeah, it's one of those things. It's not exercises because the Turkish role in Qatar is not an exercise. It's one of those things. The best way to describe them as one of those things.
Yeah, I think again, these are complicated issues, and these are relationships between countries. We don't profess to control all of that, I think what we rely on is our long-term relationship with all of these countries, and that we are all pursuing common interests in the end, and that I think is what we always have to keep in mind. What the end state is that we're focused towards, and in this region, it is increasing the stability. It is in addressing the threats that exist out there, and I think we have to take a long-term look towards all of those things.
What are your impressions about your first visit to the Mohammed Naguib base, which is a very new base?
I was, thanks. I was very impressed by what I saw. I think it looks like it has some great facilities. What we saw, both we had a chance to get out and visit some of the training sites, a little urban, kind of a mock village, if you will, where we observed some Egyptian Rangers who were training with U.S. Special Forces out there. And that was a great facility, very similar to facilities that I've trained on and that we have for our forces. So I think that is very good. We visited where they're doing the command post exercise, and again, this is a very, very good facility. It looks like it has a lot of utility. And then, of course, just the physical plant of the base looks to provide outstanding support. So I think from our perspective, this is a great place to do an exercise like this, and I think it gives us a lot of opportunities for the future.
General Votel, I mean, I would love to drag on in this conversation with you, but I know you have a very tight schedule. But I'm really grateful to you for allowing me the time to meet you, and I thank you for frankness and openness in answering all my questions. Looking forward to seeing you again on your fourth visit to Egypt.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's good to be with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.